TPN at technophilespodcast.com. I'm David Geisler, and this is the Technophiles Podcast.
I think like the limiting factor is space and how you can lay the foundation, because I think the foundation has to be in place before they start printing this home, and that is a skilled labor position.
On this episode of the Technophiles Podcast, David and Alex talk about news stories planned to bring 3D printed home to countries in need of housing. Hey everybody, welcome to the Technophiles Podcast. I am David Geisler, your host, and tonight I am joined by Mr. Alex Sheehan. Alex, how are you?
Good, how are you, Dave?
Alex, you're Skyping in from New York. Hopefully our listeners are getting pretty used to you this season. This is your first season back since like season 1 of this podcast, which was like 8 years ago. And I'm going to keep saying that for the next couple episodes in case we have new listeners, but...
Well, I think also it's going to take a few weeks for my fans to come back and get the neus. So we want to keep pounding that home. Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of fan mail. I know who I have. And quite honestly, if you see a bump in your iTunes ratings,
it's going to be, that's what it is.
It's going to be a clear indication.
You still get emails on episode 3 of the Technophiles podcast in 2006.
I don't know if I like the tone you're taking, Dave. I feel like you're not taking this very seriously.
No. That's just a really passionate and enthusiastic 6-year-old who loves following your work.
I do appeal to the 6-year-olds with my choice language, and I don't know. Do 6-year-olds even listen to this?
Well, I mean, they're welcome to if they learn something that's cool, but I'm sure that is not happening. I think this is, I feel like this is like a teenager and up kind of show. Yeah,
just enough low-level swear words to be a little bit edgy and cool, but nothing too outrageous where you wouldn't want to shut it off.
Nothing.
Parents can listen to it in the car with their kids.
You know what? I know we're kind of joking around right now, but yes, that's exactly the right idea. Indeed. So, Alex, we are, you're kind of pinch hitting tonight. We had a schedule conflict with another cast member, and I put something up on Slack. I said, can anybody jump in? And you said, actually, there's this thing that I think would be fun to talk about. Why don't I join you? And so here we are again. You know, what's funny is this season, I think you've been in every other episode so far.
Oh, Dave, and how are those ratings going?
Well, they're doing all right this season, I will admit. Alex, what are we talking about tonight? Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us kind of last minute too.
My pleasure. Today we are talking about cheap 3D printed homes, and you could call it a starter home. It's about 650 square feet of living space, but the idea is you're going to be able to introduce these at very low costs for cities, and it's going to help mitigate the burden of homeless shelters and people sleeping out on the streets.
From a technology point of yes, sorry, what's up?
Nope, go ahead.
It's this stinking over online thing. I'm still getting used to it.
Yeah, me too.
It's like a half second. As I edit these episodes, by the way, just as a side note, sometimes I'll be editing and I'm interrupting people and people are interrupting me, and I'm just like, internet. But if it wasn't for the internet, we wouldn't be able to do this show this season. So I guess we'll just deal with it.
Yeah. What
I was about to say is, from a technology point of view, I think what I was excited about the story that you have here. There's some cool social things happening as well, but from a technological point of view, we're basically talking about 3D printing a house. And we have spoken about 3D printing, I guess, often on this show over the last 3 or 4 seasons. 2-3 years ago, we talked about a company that was planning on building a 3D printer that would actually scoop up a little bit of moon dust and use some other chemicals and actually print bases on the moon. And I actually did some research on that company again in preparation for tonight's episode. And I guess they were trying to enter trials in 2018. So that should be coming up again. And I'm going to keep an eye out, because if it does, we'll definitely do an episode on that company as well. We have spoken about companies that have used 3D printing to print cellular material and literally print skin and organs and veins. Organs is a bit optimistic.
I have some experience with that, actually.
Oh, really?
When I was first starting out in software engineering, my first job was at a software startup consultancy. I think those are in the right order, those words. A combination of those 3 words. It's a startup, it was a consultancy, and it was about software. One of my colleagues went to Cooper Union here in New York City, and he was a biomedical engineering student, and he partnered with NYU to create a machine that you could take donor lungs and like bathe them in some solution that would break them down to basically the scaffolding of the lung. Because with lungs, they're hard transplant organs since there's so many little capillaries and blood vessels that have to be hooked up.
It's true.
Usually the host body rejects it. So what they're trying to do is they're going to break it down to the scaffolding and use stem cells to regenerate the rest of the lung tissue, hoping that the body would accept it.
Alex, that's exactly what we spoke about.
Well, there you go. Now,
cool.
What you might not have known is that since this was operating in New York City, my colleague was wondering, and he asked the coroner or the doctor, whoever was working at NYU with them, he asked why all the donor lungs were cancerous. To which the doctor replied, "Oh, no, that's not cancer. That's just living in New York." Because they all had little black spots all over them from all the pollution.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So apparently that's fine if you ever see some black spots on your lungs.
Just because you're in New York. Well, yes. So anyway, so that's very interesting. We enjoy talking about 3D printing very much. We have spoken about another company a couple years ago. It was a European company. It might have been out of France, and they were designing plastic printed 3D homes, but they were kind of they were 3D printing blocks or pieces that would then build these homes in a permanent manner. Tonight, you found a company that is basically planning on using we'll just call it cement for now, and I'll allow you to get into it later. They're using cement to 3D print a house. Yeah,
that's exactly right. They're using some other materials too. There's some wood, there's some iron, I think, some aluminum siding and all that around the exterior. Mm-hmm. But basically, instead of like the resin or the plastic, I don't know what you call it, the plastic yarn, the spool of yarn that's made of plastic that goes into 3D printing. Right. They're just taking and scooping up cement, and in 24 hours, they've built a single family 650 square foot home.
It's possible that there might be some chemical alterations to the cement to help it dry a little quicker or to solidify quicker, but it almost looks like a tube of toothpaste, a massive tube of toothpaste, drawing walls. And it's fascinating. Now, we've been using pronouns so far. Let's talk about the actual companies that are doing this, because it's actually a joint venture between, I think, 3 different companies. One company that's putting the social stuff together, one company that built the actual printer, and another company that's working on the software. Is that correct?
It could be. I think there might also be some governments involved as well. Haiti, El Salvador, and Bolivia are where these pilot programs are taking place. So there's possibly some input from the governments there.
Well, yes. Icon, I think, is the company that has specifically built what's called the Vulcan printer. And they've built other printers that also use the Vulcan name, but they have different sizes and things. This thing's massive. This thing's humongous. I'll let you speak about it a bit.
Well, and actually, it kind of reminds me of if you ever see a high-rise being erected, whether it's Chicago, New York, LA, whatever, you always see the cranes are being built up with the skyscrapers.
That's true.
So a lot of times the buildings will come up around the cranes, and then they'll just take the top of the crane off when they're done with the building. And the same thing kind of applies here, where you have a cement foundation, a flat foundation that you put the printer on, and it just sort of kind of does its thing around itself and puts itself, kind of just like buries itself in the home.
Well, if you're watching the video version of this episode, I went to this company's website and I grabbed their press release kit, all their assets. So we are definitely showing videos and photos right now. But if I needed to describe it to our listeners, have you ever seen, I think I can't help but think about a boat harbor. And sometimes when ships or boats are being lifted out of the water, there is we could call it a 4-legged structure on wheels that will pick a boat up, and then it can wheel usually on a series of rails in 2 directions, and then drop the boat off somewhere in a parking lot or whatever it needs to be. This 3D printer reminds me of that very much. There's essentially 2 main rails on the ground that straddle the cement base. And this printer is completely connected to itself, which of course it is. But what I mean is, once you kind of wheel this thing into place and park it, the XY vectors are all relative to its position. It does not continue to move along those rails. I understand. It might move a little bit, but for the most part, it does everything within its own structure. And the idea is, after it prints a house within about 24 hours, you can actually extend these rails and perhaps do an entire, let's just call it a city street or a city block, and just keep wheeling this thing down another 1,000 feet or whatever, a couple hundred feet, and print another house. And in a matter of a week, you could print well, 7 houses, but you could start printing like houses right alongside of a city street. And that is really cool.
Well, this is pretty huge because if you look at some of the other solutions for this type of housing, you're looking at old recycled shipping containers. You're looking at structures that can be architected to sort of be prefabricated and snap into place. But in the case of the former, that takes a huge crew that knows what they're doing, knows how to cut and solder and weld. Probably not solder. They are homes. Weld. In the case of the latter, it's a huge architectural lift, and again takes a huge crew to assemble this stuff. So the cost of that is enormous. Right now, the cost of these is around $10,000 per house, but at scale, they're thinking they're going to be able to get it down to $4,000 per house.
4,000 is the goal. I think they were already able to prove in the math that they could get it down to 6,000, but again, the goal is 4,000.
Yeah, and again, that ties into sort of the government's help and the NGOs in the countries that these are going to be put into. I would imagine that if this is a successful program, it could extend even into countries like our own in the cities that do have problem with homelessness, be it San Francisco or Vancouver or New York City. And there would be stipends attached to that as well.
Well, it's my understanding that the company News Story is the company that's kind of organizing this entire thing. And then, like I said, Icon is maybe building the actual printer. News Story, they said that they were very excited to set out to make something that it had to be something that was very power efficient, used its own power, very minimal on material requirements. Even they even had to think about things like where there may not be a ton of water, frankly, to literally mix with the cement. They had to consider all this kind of stuff. And you're absolutely right. When it comes to a skill set of building a house or even building a small house, you can imagine to train a couple engineers to roll this printer into place, push go on a piece of software and let this thing run for presumably 24 hours. And then you have a cement base. There is a little bit of wood paneling that gets added into windows and doors along the way. But for the most part, that is the skill set that's needed. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I would imagine that a lot of the structures that aren't printed would be prefabricated and just sort of bolted on into place.
I think the roof is similar, was what I was understanding.
It looks very much like you'd show up with a flatbed truck and a bunch of roofs, a bunch of the poles for the roof, and this printer, and you can crank out a bunch of houses in a week.
And it's also cool because we spoke about the International Space Station getting a 3D printer about 4 or 5 years ago. It was a big deal, and they've had a few upgrades to that printer since we spoke about it on this show. The thing that was exciting at the time was that they wanted to explore NASA, and I think maybe there was a Lowe's connection, but NASA, maybe Lowe's was a sponsor. But anyway, NASA wanted the idea was, instead of if something breaks on the International Space Station, a little plastic gear or a button or a lever or something that's a valve, for example, it can cost a lot of money and also a lot of time to essentially put in the order from the ISS down back onto Earth, have Earth produce the part, which that's probably the easiest part of this whole thing. But then you have to put it on the next load that goes up to the ISS. And that can be months sometimes, sometimes it's even 3 months. And when you're putting things up into outer space, is incredibly costly. I think I've said this before on the show, but I think the quick math is that it's like $10,000 a pound or some crazy thing like that, based on old NASA math. Maybe SpaceX will start changing that a little bit with their reusable rockets. That is certainly the goal. However, the 3D printer on the ISS, the idea was, well, wait a second, if we're paying $10,000 for a pound of material, something, not only if we use a 3D printer on the ISS, cool, we can print parts if they break, but more importantly, you can kind of economize your substrate, your material. It's just throw another 10-pound bag of goop on every single launch that goes up to the ISS, and that goop, I'm just saying it kind of jokingly right now, that goop can then be used to make a bunch of different things. It's not like you have to say, oh, they're going to need 3 versions of this gear and 10 versions of that wheel. Just send up the goop, and it becomes much more economical. And if you use this idea of sending the substrate to a remote location like the International Space Station, that economy of scale absolutely applies in this case as well.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, like just send the goop over and you can print a new house. And of course, even on top of that, there's a lot of prefab houses that have been trying to provide housing in areas that need it on the globe. And those are wonderful as well. But this system is also pretty interesting because the layout of the home can be modified with software.
Yeah, and I would imagine these are pretty modular homes at the moment, right? They're basically square, and like you said, these 3D printers are existing on tracks, and if they exist on a track, you can push it as it creates the house, or you could just extend the base of the track and have it build a rectangular home or a triangular home and have the same set of blueprints to feed into it. If you want like a multifamily home in some cases, like let's say 650 square feet is not enough for 8 people.
Right.
You could then modify the existing structure with the same raw materials and make something far more economical than what we have that exists now, which is recycled shipping containers and...
Right. And those are all very exciting as well. But I think there are some pretty cool things going on here. These super cheap houses, it does have a certain aesthetic. The house definitely has a certain look to it. You can kind of see the almost sedimentary layers. Maybe the... Oh, if I had to guess based on the assets that I saw, the nozzle that's laying this cement down might be 4 inches in diameter, perhaps. Yeah. And that is not to say that the wall is 4 inches in diameter. In classic 3D printing's fashion, these walls are printed to be essentially be hollow, which of course is very easy with 3D printed materials. I
think it's kind of just taking the place of what you would expect a home made of cinder blocks to look like and feel like.
Oh yeah, you're right, because cinder blocks technically are hollow too once you stack them all up.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, I like it.
That's kind of the key there. And they don't look ugly by any means. And again, like I don't think aesthetic is necessarily the people on the receiving end of these. That's probably not their first concern. But there is something to be said about the dignity associated with a home that looks like a home and not a home that looks like a shack.
Yes, indeed. And also because these walls are printed, the company, I'm assuming News Story, or perhaps it was the company that worked on the software, and I will have to fact check them on our break. But you can easily work in curved walls to give it a little bit of a look, maybe help the patio be a little bit larger. But just to get back to a point that you spoke about just a few minutes ago, even if the house is 600 square feet and maybe one family needs a 2-bedroom, but another family needs a 3 or 4-bedroom, but they're willing for those rooms to be much smaller, then it's so easy to just code that up and print this thing,
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think that, like, the limiting factor is space and how you can lay the foundation, because I think the foundation has to be in place before they start printing this home.
It absolutely does. You're absolutely right.
And that is a skilled labor position to lay a foundation that is going to be flat and structurally sound, to take what looks like it could be a several ton home on top of it, potentially in places that natural disasters are frequent, like Haiti. Now, I don't know anything about how structurally sound these things are. They look like they are a bomb shelter and could take a hurricane or some sort of natural disaster.
They look hardcore. They honestly do, don't they?
And that has to go into the calculus as well, in how the angles are curved and would they withstand certain amounts of wind and water and all this stuff. But again, even if they're not, even if there's a natural disaster that they find, okay, well, this Category 5 storm coming from this angle knocks over one wall of the house, that's something, again, that can be solved with software.
Oh, sure.
Because you have to measure where the foundation is, and that's it. Learn from the past.
Interesting.
And the benefit of all of this being data driven is that not only can you use the data, the blueprints, the weather data, all of that for the building of the house itself, but you can also use that in machine learning and deep learning and figure out sort of a risk analysis of what is the best type of structure for the environment, where it is, how many are in a row, if it's a city, if it's rural, what have you.
Yeah,
so I think that this thing is going to evolve and like they're not going to stand still. These guys are also, so like the company Icons in Austin. I think they unveiled it in Austin. Are they in San Francisco?
Well, they might be out of San Francisco, but for sure a test house was printed in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Just as a proof of concept. And I want to speak about this after the break. I think we're actually going to go to break in a minute here, but there's an entire social factor going on here as well, where this company is putting together the idea of letting people sponsor houses and donate houses. So that maybe a community doesn't actually have to pay that $4,000 for someone not living in a third world environment. Even organizations donating more than $4,000 for a row of houses becomes kind of realistic, actually, and even exciting and fun.
Yeah. And I think that the big point here is that in typical Silicon Valley startup fashion or San Francisco startup fashion, all the feels are going to equate to a lot of venture capital. So they'll be able to erect the infrastructure to make this thing a long-term deal and sustain itself.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, why don't we go to break here, Alex? When we come back, I do want to dive in a little bit deeper into how New Story is conducting themselves and this project and all of that, and how the sponsorships work. We have no affiliation. We're not like advertising for them or anything, but just I think that's also kind of interesting. And then maybe we can get into some ideas, because there are some things that I have not figured out in my head yet. Things like, is there an electrical element? It doesn't seem like there is. Is there, or at least if there is, it's not inside the walls. I have not observed any kind of real plumbing options, and that's okay too, because other houses, there was I think the French company that was designing the houses to be 3D printed actually was printing the pipes into the walls as negative space for plumbing and electricity and things like that. I don't see any of that going on here, but we can speak to some of that when we come back. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Cool, man. I'll see ya after some kind of song. Let's go start the show. Gonna 3D print a brand new home, making it count because we all know. Gonna print so many, let's go. Icon is making it flow, moving cement through a big nozzle. New Story wants us to know the giant printer is a go. Printing so many houses won't take too long, especially when we print them all in a line. That'll be nice because we can just push the printer on to print another house on the adjacent building site. Okay, here we go. Eventually gonna get to Mexico. Other countries first so we can show. El Salvador, now here we go. From TPN at Technophilespodcast.com, I'm David Geisler, and this is the Technophiles Podcast. All right, we are back from the break. I am David Geisler here with Alex Sheehan, Skyping in from New York. And Alex,
hello.
Hello again. Alex, we're speaking about New Story and Icon's cement 3D printed houses.
Yeah, so as I understand it, Icon is the one building the 3D printer. New Story is the one doing the sort of social organization of getting these homes into slums in different countries.
Yeah, they're almost the startup company, it seems like.
And during the break, we did a little bit of due diligence and came across that they're actually a Y Combinator company from the summer 2015 batch.
Yes, indeed. Why don't you speak about that a little bit, actually, because I thought it was interesting.
That actually kind of lends them a lot of credibility and makes me think that maybe this is going to be a thing for a while. And we talked about how the good story and their location in San Francisco is going to help them raise a ton of money on its own. But what Y Combinator does is it just automatically gives them a really good starting value. Y
Combinator is a incubator, or it's a piece, it's a company in itself. What is Y Combinator? What is that?
So Y Combinator is a software accelerator, and what that means is it does 2 batches a year of a bunch of startups. And if you get into Y Combinator, you're automatically given a $120,000 investment for 7% equity stake in the company, which gives you about a $2 million valuation out of the gate.
Okay.
not only that, it gives you sort of a Rolodex of all of the previous Y Combinator companies, which includes like Airbnb. So the benefit there is if you like, you can call up Brian Chesky of Airbnb at any point and say like, hey, when you were at this stage and XYZ happened, what did you do with Airbnb and how did you get through it? And there's, I think it started out taking like something crazy low, like 10 or 12 companies per batch. And now it's up to, I think it's in the 20s or 30s or something like that.
Twice a year.
Exactly. Twice a year.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you're already starting with about a $2 million valuation. And one cool thing about Y Combinator is that if you look at the breadth of all startups in the United States, you see a success rate of about 3%. The rest of them fail. And by success, I mean are still in business or have had some sort of exit. Either they've sold to another company or they've gone public or something like that.
Yeah.
But with Y Combinator companies, the success rate is about 93% of all the companies that have entered Y Combinator at some point. My goodness.
That is almost an inverse.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. Now, a lot of it has to do with the good practice you get. You get to pitch all the other companies once a week on your company, and they can give you advice on where you should pivot, what you should do if they're a customer. But it also has to do with just the name attached to your company moving forward. And like I said, if you're starting to go into Series A through whatever rounds and you already have a $2 million valuation and you've gotten all this good advice and your customer base is growing and you're making money, you can put a premium on your company when you're going to raise that second round of venture funding because it de-risks your company for those venture capitalists. Rarely will you take a bath or like have a down round after you've gotten out of Y Combinator and your company is making money or having customers or growing or something. Which makes me think that this company can be around for a long time if it does the right thing, right? If its financials are good, if it can actually provide the operational expertise to get these homes into these slums, which again is a pretty high bar, right? If we're talking countries that allow slums, we're talking about governments that are possibly difficult to deal with. We're talking about locals that might be resistant to Westerners coming in and changing their village. Now, maybe not. Maybe they have done the research and they know how to de-risk the areas that they want to go into.
I couldn't help but think about if these houses are donated from sponsors, which apparently since 2015 they've built up enough funding for 1,300 homes according to their website already. I don't think those homes have been printed yet, but it would appear that they're ready to get going on this. I was kind of thinking, how do the communities decide who gets these homes? It's not necessarily, maybe that's a different path that we don't need to go down in this episode. But I was kind of thinking, well, if that house can facilitate a single family or something, how does that get picked? Why does that family get it over that family? But anyway. Yeah.
I mean, what I would imagine is happening is that this company News Story probably knows where they can make the biggest impact. And maybe that means that they pick communities where they can turn over the entire housing infrastructure, right? Like if they can build so many thousand homes, and they find a small population of a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 people in, I don't know, wherever, maybe that's going into their calculus of where they put these things.
I completely agree. In fact, something that they actually put out, that they illustrate or they highlight on their website is the community planning aspect. And I'm seeing a graphic right now, which on the video I'll be putting up as an asset, where I'm clearly seeing rows of 6 of these houses, 6 houses in a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 9 or 10 of these rows I'm seeing right now, kind of not necessarily put together as city blocks, but clearly lines. And the entire community it's an entire little town of these 3D printed houses. And this is a piece of concept graphic I would understand. But yes, I think this would suggest that is the intent.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it has to at least be a part of the mathematics of the whole endeavor is, where is this going to do the most good off the bat? Because if you're starting out like this, you need to be hitting home runs project after project, because this is a very expensive endeavor. And yeah, you can raise a ton of money, but who knows, right? Like if one of your communities fails, that's potentially tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of materials and manpower, and then also goodwill that's gone, right? So if Bolivia sees that it failed in Haiti, then why would they give the NGOs or this organization a chance to try and do the same thing. Yeah. So past success, I think, is going to be a big thing moving forward for this company.
I agree. And also News Story spoke about it's really sometimes it's actually getting the land is one of the trickiest things. And that makes me realize that, of course, they're thinking about building entire communities. It's not about just patchworking a row of houses, for example, in an existing slum, I would imagine.
Right. I mean, because it's an easier sell to say, hey, move a mile down the road, here's some new houses, than it is to say, hey, we're going to tear down your home for a minute. Just go hang outside for a day.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense at all.
You can't really do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you'd like to speak about? We have a little bit more time here.
Well, I think what'd be interesting is to kind of visualize how this could affect housing in the United States. Or
let's do it.
Right? Because we on average, the median income is something around something super low, like around $20,000 a year. And I'm not saying that every community is expensive to the point of not being able to afford a lifestyle that way. But we're getting to the point now where we are seeing some pretty fundamental infrastructure problems in the United States. If we look at something like Flint, Michigan, which has gone about 3 years without clean water, we have people still going and getting packages of bottles of water every morning. So we have some pretty big failings on the parts of local, state, and federal governments there. And there's no cheap solution to that, right? When we talk about spending and infrastructure plans, we're talking in the trillions of dollars at this point. The 2016 elections were pretty much, I don't know, in the primaries at least, a third of the talking points between Bernie and Hillary were about spending on infrastructure. And that, of course, forced the Republicans and Donald Trump to also talk about infrastructure. But what happened, and the spending plan is not going to happen quickly. So we're going to see communities like Flint without water for a long time. We're going to see more communities start to fail in the same way, because guaranteed they're not the only community that has this type of failure. And not to mention the enormous cities where there's a huge burden on public housing and homeless shelters. So you take something like San Francisco, which has an enormous homeless population and not necessarily the greatest climate year round. And rather than trying to fill up these homeless shelters or put them on buses to neighboring cities, neighboring communities, this is something where we can have small structures that are very inexpensive to build to at least try to mitigate the disaster of homelessness for a little bit until we can get our act together with larger infrastructure projects.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And this is when the house that was built in Texas, when you look at it, it feels like it could be right in there with like a tiny home community type of aesthetic and way of living. It seems perfectly acceptable. And I think that could work out quite well in America as well.
Yeah, in every enormous city. And when I say enormous city, I'm really talking about like LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City. New York City especially has taken like the homelessness problem here is so bad that I don't know if this is entirely true or not, but de Blasio has kind of been shipping people upstate and to neighboring states because our homeless shelters cannot house the number of homeless people here. What we do have in neighboring communities in the outer boroughs is space. I'm not saying you tear down some buildings in Manhattan to build these things.
Right.
But we go further out into Queens. We go further out into the Bronx. We go into, Connecticut, even New Jersey, and we build these homes for $4,000 a piece. That's got to be comparable to the cost of housing someone in public housing or a homeless shelter or something like that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then you can actually you're creating an area that this person can have a little bit of identity with and a little bit of ownership of. Perhaps, just because someone's homeless doesn't mean they don't have any money. Sometimes that is absolutely true, but sometimes it just means you don't have your $20,000 for a down payment or whatever it is, or 40 or 80 or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
This could be like you could build these little communities to help people get started to get back into things.
Absolutely.
Where maybe they are actually buying that house or paying for some kind of rent version in some of these houses that are built. But from a government point of view, the houses weren't expensive to build, but they're strong.
Yes.
I mean, that could be something that works out.
I think it's huge. And I don't think it's the solution to all these problems. It's not a cure-all. There's some pretty fundamental failures on the parts of governments at all levels because of this, or that have caused this. But what this does is it gives someone an address. If you're applying for a job, you can write an address down on an application. It helps get people off the street in dangerous situations. We had a blizzard where it snowed about 8 inches last Wednesday. We're going to have another one tomorrow. And we do not, as a city, have beds in homeless shelters for everyone to sleep in. So people are sleeping outside in literal blizzards. And I know you're in Wisconsin, Dave. You're saying, how bad could it be? We get blizzards. It's 40 below. It's still like 20s, mid-20s, but still unbearable to be outside in.
I was thinking about this the other day. I think the East Coast has been getting it worse than the West or the Midwest in the past couple of years.
It's weird. It's this phenomenon where we get pockets of storms that are just relentless, but we only get like 1 or 2 of them a year. And that's it.
You know what it is? It's like some big bubble. It's not a bubble, but some big front pushes across the ocean, and then things freak out on the coast, and then it relaxes again, huh? Is that what it is?
Yeah, and as I understand it, we're getting a little bit off topic, but as I understand it, there's just like since the Earth is warming, the atmosphere is holding more moisture. That happens more over the Atlantic as it's coming into to North America. Anyway.
Certainly. So one thing that we could point out, one segue to get back onto these houses, it is intuitively obvious that these are not multi-story houses or anything like that. Clearly single story, relatively simple layout type houses.
Yes. And even if it's not a permanent home for a lot of these people, it can be one where during bad weather they can populate. Like I said, they can put an address on a job application.
Yes, it's true. And to be clear, we're still kind of blue sky engineer. We're blue skying if these were to happen in America. This is not News Story's plan right now.
Right, exactly. Sorry. News Story. If you want to kick back a couple bucks to this guy for the idea, I wouldn't say no. I'll talk you up.
Well, News Story's hiring right now. I saw it on their website. Maybe nothing like that.
Not enough altruism in my bones to quit my cushy job and work for pennies.
Fair
but who
enough.
knows? Maybe it'll get. Maybe I don't know. The tough thing for a company like this, I feel, is making an exit, and by that I mean either getting acquired by a company or going public or figuring out some way to pay the investors back their money. Maybe they can operate as.
I think they're a nonprofit, isn't that right? I saw that in the notes somewhere.
That could be true. And perhaps they can structure it so they can operate with a small workforce for years and never have to make an exit. But I don't see how investors, maybe investors can take royalties from the profits of the company, or maybe like the shareholders can get, well, I guess that is kind of how nonprofits work, right? Is it pays out the profits to employees and shareholders and communities and all that, right? I've never actually run.
The marketing right now for News Story's direction is clearly one wherein the money is almost, the marketing is such that money is going straight into just building more and more houses. Maybe a couple T-shirts with New Wave logos on it, but that's pretty much it, is what it seems like. I don't know if there's really too much of a profit model here. So I think you're right. Maybe so if it's a nonprofit, could investors, I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about right now, Alex, could investors somehow use these as write-offs, these kinds of donations and things like that in their taxes? Is that a possibility?
I have no idea if that's illegal or not, but what they could do is apply for grants. And what sticks out as strange for me is if they're going to operate as a nonprofit, and this kind of plays to a broader pattern I've been recognizing, in that we as a species really lucked out. That's sort of at the pinnacle of well, I guess not the pinnacle, but the beginning of the digital revolution.
Yes.
The companies and the figures that are leading this revolution are basically altruistic hippies in the Bay Area. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that Y Combinator might take a flyer on News Story and give them the seed money they need, just because they're going to be helping humanity, not with any expectation of a huge payout in the end.
Well, you have children of the 80s, and then you have the one generation, the as you kind of joke, the hippies from the generation before that.
Yep.
And I think there is, I mean, just last week, Leona and I spoke about robo-advisors and how a lot of younger investors, I guess, I don't know, 40 and down, but really anybody, oftentimes they want to invest in companies that they believe are trying to help the world a little bit here. Maybe it was all of that 90s, you know, like when we were in grade school and junior high and high school, and in the 90s, it was all about save the planet, save the planet, save the planet, and in Free Willy and Captain Planet and all that stuff. Maybe that did work a little bit.
Yeah, no, there's entire index funds for companies that are green and don't pollute, and they're doing really, really well because there is something to say about this generation who can recognize that the generation before us has been spending down our natural resources without doing anything to keep the population under control. So
You're right. And I just realized one more thing. Right? I just realized one more thing. Oh, pardon me. I think we just had a little internet hiccup, but I just realized one more thing. Speaking of internet, that actually over the last 10 or 15 years, just knowledge. The globe is a single knowledge base now, where that was not necessarily the case in the 80s or the 60s or the 30s or something like that, right? Yeah. And so maybe just the awareness is more present.
Awareness, and then also being able to operate without so much of a loss, right? If you look at global supply chains, they're incredibly impressive with the democratization of human knowledge and knowing where things are and double entry bookkeeping and all of that. Yeah. But they're still very wasteful. And I think that there's going to be a wave of technology with blockchain that's going to solve a lot of those issues, and it's going to be way more efficient. And we're going to be able to ship food around the globe and have it readily available in tiny bodegas as readily available as it is in like a huge grocery chain.
I suppose so. Certainly that is a future that you and I wish for. I think we agree on that for sure.
And I think the scales are tipping in that way. We see it with electricity and energy. I think we're also going to see it in terms of it being way more economically feasible to give the operational expertise to a ton of small bodegas and small businesses the same way that Walmart has their operational expertise. And a lot of this stuff is going to be open knowledge and public knowledge because it's going to be run on blockchain. And I swore I wouldn't make this episode about blockchain.
How can you not these days?
How can you not?
How can you not? That is a technology that will, I think, I think, you know, it's possible. This maybe is a little too ridiculous,
Hit me, Dave.
But it's possible that the internet that we've known so far was a transition from these old data, single database points to this kind of hive situation that's obviously going to be coming. And were you going so far as to suggest that the physical world might emulate a blockchain style of environment, also using literally blockchain technologies, but that you could get many small businesses that are hiving together either through data, information, or even finances instead of these massive hubs like things like Walmart? Is that what you're speaking about?
Yes. And the distinction is with the idea is that you can synthesize the knowledge of large groups like a global supply chain down and make that information public and give that to distributors and wholesalers to make better decisions on when to try and sell products into the smaller vendors like bodegas, right? So if you can say, I'm a wholesaler in New York City and I know that 20 bodegas in Greenpoint, Brooklyn are running low on bananas, then you're going to load up your truck with bananas and drive to Greenpoint and sell all your bananas to make sure that they're well supplied because they're selling them. Right now, that doesn't really happen. That only happens if you're Walmart or Target or a huge grocery chain or are a wholesaler distributor yourself.
And you have your central hub with your own network.
Well, the network is everyone's network. Right now, Walmart has a huge network because it has a huge number of outlets.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, right. The network the network, quote unquote, that is Walmart, that they can send their bananas to all their locations or do whatever.
Yep. But now if that whole supply chain is on a blockchain, on a public blockchain, you're giving that same sort of knowledge and data to wholesalers and distributors that can do it on a much smaller scale to multiple bodegas. So you can say, I want 20 bananas in stock at all times, rather than having to call up your wholesaler and negotiate the best price and call 5 more to make sure you're getting the best price and then have them delivered next Tuesday.
Right.
You can have someone already in the neighborhood when you're running low and say, hey, I need them at 20th Street.
I joked about this last week when we were speaking about robo-advisors, but I think that okay, let me put it this way. I remember when I was a younger, I guess I was a kid, maybe I was a teenager, and I think I was a teenager, but I saw a rerun or I rented Star Trek 4, and that's the one that they travel back to the 80s. Yep. They travel back in time to current day when it was shot. I'm sure that was for budgetary reasons for the film, but Leonard Nimoy did a good job directing that one, and they worked it into the plot accordingly. However, that was the first. It's always part of Star Trek lore that money doesn't exist anymore and all of that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But that was the first time where it was really like front and center, and they made jokes about it because they're in a system where they had to use dollars and things like that. I was joking last week that the robo-advisors are going to become so efficient that they're going to break quote unquote economy. And then, a couple, 100 years, we won't have money anymore. And maybe Star Trek isn't that impossible to imagine. And
I don't think it's even the advisors. I don't even think
it's the thing. I'm saying, if I may, I think that if we want to go have a little bit of fun here and put some fuel on the fire, I don't, it's hard to predict forward with certain technologies, but you could also imagine blockchains providing knowledge in a similar everybody has it kind of way that economy does change, and it does start to not that this is the goal, but it does start to the ability to visualize a future without money. Not that that's necessarily the goal.
Why isn't that the goal is my question. Well, let me take the concept and turn it.
All right.
I think that blockchain is going to operate on our economy in a way that we still have the basis of money and value stores, but it just becomes more economical for people to pay out for mundane tasks. So ditch digging will be $100,000 a year salary, right? So
sometimes Go for it. Sorry.
I think the key here, to tie it back into our stories today, is that 3D printing is going to be the killer, and that's going to be when we start living in a post-scarcity economy, is when we can press a button on a printer and out pops whatever we want.
Yes, that's true. And maybe you have your 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, 10 different materials that you can print with. But for the most part, you're right. We have a Star Trek replicator. It's not going to go right, but
not today.
Well, actually might make a similar noise, more like, but I'm just making.
It'll take a day, but then you'll have your Earl Grey tea hot.
But then you'll have it and it'll be hot. But I wanted to make one more point because we should get going.
I really interrupted that point. I got so excited about post-scarcity economics.
It's fine. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, one of the reasons, I think that could be the goal. And I think that is a cool idea. And I think that it is a possible future for society. But, sometimes economy sometimes it's important to have a banana cost more in location A than location B compared to location C, because maybe at location B the apples cost more, and then in location C the oranges cost more. Sometimes that's quote unquote important. Certainly that's a system we have now. And
I think it's important for arbitrage opportunities for people that are in that system that benefit from things having variable cost. But I don't think that benefits anyone as a consumer of that system. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
It benefits the wholesalers, and it benefits the vendors who sell the bananas, but it doesn't benefit me, right? That's not going to be the lever that drives down the cost for bananas for me in the end.
Right. Yes. So I guess what I was trying to wrap my head around a little bit here, and we are getting off topic a bit, but what I was trying to wrap my head around is for the end user, or for the normal person purchasing bananas in this idea, you're absolutely right. Is there a risk to have our economy crumble a little bit if the bananas and the apples do all cost the same everywhere, because everybody knows how much they cost everywhere?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there is like a path to this. I think that we would have to like minimize the human population down to about 10 people and start over, because there are too many interests in, like, and rightly so, right? Like there's a reason that we can there's a good reason for capitalism and economics. It's not a cure-all. There are some pretty gross points of failure, but it is a system in which we've built a relatively comfortable lifestyle relative to the rest of human history. Not that we should be content with that, right? There's still huge problems, and the problems are growing, and we're going in the wrong direction right now. Like we mentioned before with communities like Flint, Michigan.
Right.
But you know, it's a way to generate massive amounts of wealth for a large population. Right. We have a GDP that's in the tens of trillions. That's a lot of money to sustain 300 million people. So
fair enough, Alex.
Yeah.
So I think this episode's pretty much done. However, let's just speak to these 3D printers one more time. It was fun to go there. We haven't done that. Back in the olden days with Technophiles, when our episodes were 2.5 hours long, we used to jump all over the place, you might recall. But out of respect
Why do you think I quit?
You moved.
I ran out of time. I moved to get away from it. I don't like New York. This place sucks.
Yeah, my lungs look like cancer here. Anyway, news stories doing some cool things. Certainly from a technology point of view, I think the 3D printing using some kind of cement-based substrate is super cool.
It seems like they're poised for success with their foundation so far with Y Combinator. And being in the right place at the right time, there's something to say for that. If you're in San Francisco in 2018, there's a lot of potential for a lot of investment there and a lot of support, both materially, operationally.
That's interesting.
We've got a lot of smart engineers in the area.
It is interesting. From our perspective, I think it'd be fun to kind of keep an eye on this. And if we find a story where some of these houses are starting to get printed 6 months from now or something, you and I should do a little follow-up.
Yeah, I like it.
That'd be cool. Alex, until then, certainly plenty of things will happen in between that moment and this moment. But until then, people can find you on the internet in which ways? Yeah,
I'll be tweeting about 3D printed homes and Instagramming about 3D printed homes at Works on My Machine. No O in Works.
Fantastic. People can find me on Twitter and Instagram by searching Raptor Paint. Like Velociraptor, Raptor Paint, all one word. And more importantly, we would like it if people tweet us at Technophiles Pod on Twitter if they have any thoughts about the very things that we spoke about in this episode. If you're listening right now and you have something that you think we got wrong or something that you really liked what we spoke about, or maybe something that we didn't get to, but maybe we scraped the surface on, please tweet us and we would love to return to this. Because Alex, one thing that I haven't really spoken about on our main episodes this season is we do have a structure built where we do bonus episodes. Jake and I did a bonus episode follow-up on the Falcon X launch a few weeks later. We did a quick little 20-minute kind of, I think it was 18 minutes, but whatever, follow-up on our XML feed. So we have the power to do listener feedback bonus episodes that are outside of our normal feed, which is super cool. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching our show on YouTube, please put comments down below. We always reply.
Smash that subscribe button.
Remember, hit that bell and subscribe. If you want notifications every time we have a new video, click that bell.
If you have any recommendations about future episodes of Technophiles podcast, go ahead and leave a comment below, and we'll talk about it. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Until then, find us on Twitter at Technophiles Pod.
All right, Alex. Have a good, probably couple weeks. I think I'm going to see you in 2 or 3 weeks for our normal schedule. This was fun. Again, thanks for pinch hitting here, and it's a cool story. I learned something today.
Yeah, me too.
Cool, dude. See you later.
We'll see you.